at 2:30 p.m. Mr. Lyon, would you please call the roll?
Sure, I will do that. Mr. Van Hove.
Present.
Mr. Stitchick.
Present.
Zacton. Nolte.
Here.
Mr. Boland.
Here.
Mr. Rebuffo. Over here, Mr. Alini. Or Ms. Heil from DEC. Okay. Mr. Lindemood.
Present.
Ms. Carpenter.
Here.
I think I got everyone in the room. And yes, so we have a quorum.
Thank you.
And then we have, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Colhayes.
I am here.
Thank you. Is the public involvement announcement?
Will. We haven't done this in person in a while. The AMATS meetings, the committee meetings are open to the public, and the public will be invited to comment. If you have a business item, we'll have presentation by staff or a consultant, and after that, the committee will be given a chance to discuss the topic, and then after that, the public will be invited to comment. And I guess just a reminder that we are doing this in conjunction with Teams as well, so a bit of a hybrid. We did test it yesterday, and it seemed pretty clear that even folks in the back of the room you could hear on Teams Live, but just a reminder to act like you're on stage in your high school play and project and enunciate and all that wonderful stuff, so we can hear it for the recording and folks online can hear it as well.
Thank you. Item 3, approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion for approval?
I move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any corrections or changes for the agenda?
I did get a request for a project update for the Chugach Way. I believe it's a recon study. I did tell them that we had a pretty full agenda and I probably wouldn't get to it, but they did request that. So if we can put that down there, and if we happen to go through everything else fast, we can get to that. It's a Dowell, Renee Whitesell presenting on the Chugach Way recon study.
Can I get a motion for approval?
I move to approve.
I second.
Are there
I
any?
know we're in the middle of a motion, but can we have the record reflect that Ms. Heil showed up at 2:32? So she gets credit for her vote.
Okay, any objections to accepting this amended agenda? Okay, hearing none, amended agenda is approved. Next order of business, we have the June 10th, 2021 minutes for approval. Can I get a motion for approval? Move to approve.
I second.
Thank you. Any corrections or changes to these minutes? Okay, are there any objections to approval of the minutes? All right, hearing none, the June 10th, 2021 meeting minutes are approved. Okay, moving right along to the action items, agenda item 5A, non-motorized public review draft. Craig, are you presenting on this?
We'll have Joni Wilm, our senior planner who is managing that plan, present.
All right, thanks everyone. Mind if I just stay seated? I can stand. I'll stand. I mean, we're in person, so. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending today. So the non-motorized public review draft is out for, has been out for public review. Went out in March for a 60-day public review period. And I had a work session. We did a work session last week, or I think it was last week, on going over all of the comments that we received. We received 762 comments, which was a lot. We weren't expecting that many. But we did, Christine is our awesome public involvement planner, and she helped us summarize those comments into a really nice graphical summary so that we can sort of see what they were all about. And I know I went over this in the work session, so I'll just briefly touch up on it here. So Those comments were broken down into 6 categories. Projects, there are comments about the projects, comments about the actual document, comments about policy within the document, others, which I'll go over in a second, comments about design, and then comments about plan coordination. So just looking at the largest category overall was comments that we received about projects. So those were specifically folks asking for different project or an edit to an existing project. And so we received 292 comments on the project category. The next highest category was documents. So we received 186 comments on the document itself. And those mostly consisted of asks to change something or other about the document. It's either something graphically they want to change or some graphic layout of the document that they want to change. So that was the next highest category. The next one was policy. And if you turn the form over that I gave you, policies on the back, and the majority of those comments were, those are broken down for you here on the right, but a lot of them, a significant portion of them were about maintenance and improving our winter maintenance here. Policy and program development, improving policies on educating the community, on non-motorized planning, funding, and equity. So those were the categories there. The other category was basically clarifications if someone didn't understand something in the plan, and then a general positive or a general negative comment on the plan. We're excited to see that we got a lot more positive comments than negative comments, so that was exciting. The next category was coordination. So those big piece of that category was making comments on having this plan coordinate with all of our other existing plans. A big one was the land use plan, the land use 2040 plan. Also coordinating with HSIP data. So we are excited to work with DOT on coordinating all of their HSIP data, which wasn't available when we began the planning effort. So it's going to help us expand our area where we see that we need to make improvements for pedestrians, on intersections and corridors. And so that's a step that we, in the comment response table, you'll see that we have a lot of comments pertaining to that. So that's what we're looking forward to doing with DOT. Next category is coordination on public involvement, what we did in this planning process, and then coordination with different agencies. And our final category was the design category. And so those were just comments on designing for safety, designing for winter maintenance, facility design, and then designing for good wayfinding, so signage, like that. So I know you've all heard this before, so probably just giving it a course, but just wanted to go through those real quick. And then before you today, we have the comment response table, which includes all the 776 comments, which we did go over in the work session. So between now and last week's work session, I incorporated all of the comments from the TAC and PC committees that asked for changes to this table. So those are all included within there. If you have any questions about that, feel free to ask me. And today, we're asking for this committee to approve this draft document with the 776 comment response table so that we can move forward and start making actual changes to the plan and turn it into the document that is going to be then adopted. So that's our ask for today. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Just to clarify,
Yes.
We're asking this committee to recommend to the policy
I'm
committee.
sorry, yes. Thanks, Greg. Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Did anyone want to ask any questions?
Yes. First, thank you guys for putting this in such a great format. This was really helpful, and the work session was really helpful to walk through everything. I'm just curious, I know we have a lot of deferment to a further maintenance conversation. I'm just wondering if that's been scheduled.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question. So we would like to schedule a second winter maintenance forum to discuss all of those comments. And I would like to schedule it for August. It hasn't been officially scheduled yet, but if we can do it virtually or some hybrid of virtual, then we'd like to do that in August. And I'm assuming, I mean, it's July already, so that'll be well before the changes in here have been made.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Would anyone from the policy committee like to ask any questions or make any comments? Would anyone from the public like to ask any questions or make comments?
Just want to make sure that there's no on Teams requesting.
Good. Okay. What is the will of this committee?
I move to approve the comments.
Can I get a second? Thank you. Are there any objections to approval of this motion? Okay, hearing none, motion is approved. Okay, on to agenda item 5B, 2023 to 2026 TIP criteria update. Craig, will you be presenting this?
I'll start, and we'll see where we go from there. So we had a work session just recently on this, the TIP criteria. These, just as a reminder, these are the criteria that we use when we get our project nominations in to rank and score them to put into the next TIP, the next 4-year program of projects for the AMATS allocation. And so these are, they've morphed over time. Usually what we try to do every 4 years as we're doing a new set of criteria, try to update them if they have to be updated due to the federal regulations, and also to try and just tweak them a little bit to make them a little more objective. So that's what we usually try and do. And this time around we've incorporated, they're substantially different than before. Again, we had this in the work session, so Aaron and I tried to create this version of it based on what we heard in the work session. That's what you have before you. Aaron also created this little TIP criteria handbook. We'll get nice graphics on it later, but right now it's just little paper copies, walls of text sort of thing there to help understand a little bit more. But we're asking that you recommend that the policy committee in 2 weeks release these for 30-day public comment review. It's kind of, hopefully, if you have questions, you can try and answer them. Yes, ma'am.
At the work session, I had helped at the very end of the work session. Remember, I asked if there could be like a one-page table of the criteria that just showed all the points in one page, so it would be easy to see.
I do have that. We
We did
just
that.
didn't print it off.
It's been printed off. I remember making it though.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it goes out, it really should have that because
Yeah.
it really saves people from having to tear through these page by page to see the layout all in one page. So if you could
Yeah,
add that.
I apologize. We did make it.
Yeah.
We made it. And we put it together and it looks wonderful. Just for all completely on Teams, we would just bring it up. But
And I also noticed you've made them all equal, 2020, 2020. That was different than what you said was at the work session.
yeah, I guess, Aaron. I can't remember our discussion on why we decided to make them all equal.
Yeah.
Aaron,
We're going to bring up the
okay.
sheet you were talking about on the screen right there so you can at least see kind of what we did. But
Cindy's question though was about why we made them all the points equal, and I forgot what
it was actually because something you brought up, Cindy. You mentioned that it was going to be the committee's different purviews to look and see how we wanted to kind of like assign the scoring to each area. Our MTP does not score or does not rank our goals. So we don't say safety is the #1 priority, next is this, blah, blah, blah. So it was a little awkward to have safety with the highest scoring points when we actually didn't sit down as a group and talk about it should receive the highest scoring points. So we decided to make them equal. So first we set it to 100 because when you score to 100, it's easy for people to see, okay, a project that scores a 60 is pretty low compared to a project that scores an 80. So trying to keep it at a 100 scale, and we just broke it down equal amongst each category.
I think it's a fair way to start.
And then,
I was just curious why.
yeah, that was an error on my part because we had heard, well, safety should be first, and so we assigned the 28 points last time, but then when we talked about it more after the last work session, we're like, well, we shouldn't really be doing that as staff. That should be what the technical and policy committee should be deciding if they want to prioritize what is first or most.
I can't remember, does the federal program at all assign priorities to the goals?
No, that's another thing. So feds, the national planning factors and national goals do not assign priority. And as far as I know, the state's long range plan also does not assign priority of what is their most important versus second. And by saying this is number one, this is number two, they can say in the topic, but they don't actually say everything is focused here first and then goes down from there. So we're trying to keep it consistent as well as what other people are doing. And we did look at other MPOs and they were pretty equal. A few of them had 1 point difference between them. But again, that'll be maybe what you guys talk about.
So last question, because I did miss part of the work session. So a lot of times using criteria is being able to differentiate like projects, right? So we have needs, and that's supposed to help identify ranking needs. But also, we have two projects that are the same in the sense like two rebuilds or two whatever. That when they go through this criteria, you're hoping the criteria will differentiate and put one above the other. Have you had a chance to take two projects and run it through the draft criteria to see if there's if it's working from that perspective at all?
I mean, we didn't test these, no, because we didn't really have a lot of time between the last work session and stuff. But I think the possibility is there for that to happen because of how we have it set up with the bonus points. So you have positive and negative points that you can assign projects based on certain things. So, and also like safety, for example, it talks about the effectiveness of the countermeasures. If you have two areas with the same crash statistics, and then they're both encountering the same countermeasures that are exactly the same effectiveness, then the hope is maybe some of the other criteria kind of weigh it out. But the reality is you may have similar projects that are like that, and then.
I mean, I've been part of the scoring,
Yeah.
so I know how hard, practical application of these things is difficult. So I'm just anticipating the questions that we might get.
We did add in some more, not subjective, but maybe more subjective than objective criteria in there to help with that kind of counterbalance of, okay, they're exactly the same statistic-wise, countermeasure-wise, but we know something extra about that area that's not captured in the criteria that can help us, because I'll be honest, we can't capture everything in the criteria. It's impossible for us to figure out every possible scenario. So we want there to be some flexibility on the projects. Otherwise, you're so rigid that you have to go with your first project, even if it's a $150 million project that you can't afford in your tip. So.
Thanks.
We did, with the earlier version of this, we did do a little test, but we haven't done a test with these versions, but we will.
It might be by the time it gets through public comment, when it comes back to TAC and we're looking through the comments and how to figure out how to handle the comments and deal with it, that might be a good thing to have handy.
Yeah, no,
Just to see how not a lot, but just
okay.
like existing projects, see how they would float out and how to address comments. that we
Yeah,
might
it's
have.
always a good exercise to do. So if you weigh out or not, so.
You did it.
So really quickly, sorry, I'll interject. So we broke it down. The first table on the left is showing the points broken down. Roadway, bike ped per category. So safety, mobility, so you can see it's spread equally. And then the next box below it is talking about the number of criteria by category. So the roadway criteria is pretty equal, about 5 per category. That's how many criteria you have to score a project in. And then the non-motorized is also equal with about 4 per. So you may notice that the bike and ped have one less criteria in general, but the points are equal. So that's our way to designate that they should be equal when you're scoring them, even if the criteria is a little different between the projects. And then we just did a really quick further breakdown so you can see safety, how do the points fall in. So you don't have to have all the text that people miss. So now you can see, okay, it's pretty equal with 4 to 2 or 4 to 7, depending on what exactly is going on. So
I think this will really help. I really do.
Okay.
In adding it to your handbook. It lets people focus in with the big picture.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from committee members? Would any members of the policy committee like to make any comments or ask any questions? Would any members of the public like to ask any questions or make any comments? What is the will of this committee?
Move to approve release of the draft criteria for public comment.
I second.
Are there any objections to approval of this motion? Okay, hearing none, motion is approved. On to agenda item 5C, 2019 to 2022, Amendment 2, Air Quality Conformity Approval. Craig, is this also yours?
Yep. So we have the tip amendment before us today, and obviously the first step is always making sure that we conform to the air quality.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.
Of course. So, we did have a air quality interagency consultation team meeting, and they met and looked at the contents of the conformity determination report. And after that review, they agreed that it was, we're good in non-technical terms. Cindy could give you chapter and verse on what exactly that means, but yeah, so we're okay. So that would be, the request is to recommend the policy committee approve this, but obviously we do this first and then first after that.
Does everybody understand what the air quality conformity is?
Please explain. I
Well, I don't know. This is,
I can give the layman's terms version.
well, I don't know anybody here except for, this is just a determination is required to spend money in a maintenance area. You can't spend any money in a maintenance area, federal dollars in a maintenance area, unless you show that it will not exacerbate your air quality problems. So we have a maintenance area for PM, particulate matter in Eagle River, and we have maintenance area for carbon monoxide here in Anchorage. We're in what's called a limited maintenance plan. We applied to EPA and it was approved, and it allows us to use a modified conformity determination where we do not have to use modeling, so it's much cheaper for AMATS to do amendments to the tip, and what we use is actual monitoring data. So this determination is, it just says in essence that we looked at all the monitoring data, we meet all the monitoring criteria, and we're way below the standard, and that we're continuing to commit to our transportation control measures or any of our air quality related SIP items, and that our everything is fiscally constrained. And what's really important about the air quality conformity is FHWA is actually the ones who approve your conformity. They don't actually approve the amendment, they approve the conformity determination. So if your conformity determination isn't approvable, then you don't get to spend it. They won't give you any money. So then you can't use your tips or your FTPs. So that's why DVC is on this, to make sure that all of the air quality conformity determinations are done correctly and by the book, so that we don't have any problems with FHWA approving it and get our money. So, very pleased that we're continuing to meet all of our air quality requirements and meeting our values. So, and it's really good to note that the municipality has been very proactive in helping in the spring, especially to put dust palleters on the streets in Eagle River, because that's how we're preventing going to non-attainment or exceeding our limited maintenance plan requirements in Eagle River for PM10. So if we weren't doing your palliative lay down dust presses, we probably would not be able to meet our air quality conformity for limited maintenance plan requirements. So it's a good kudo for an acknowledgement to the municipality and DOT's efforts on making sure on their operation maintenance on that preventative measure. So it's really important to bring that up every year or every couple of years so that those fundings don't get cut. It's really critical. We're always on the border out there in Eagle River. Jim's shaking his head. Yeah, we're really close. So thank you. And yes, it's hopefully that helped fill in some blanks, maybe. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Any comments from any policy committee members? Questions? Would anyone from the public like to ask a question or make a comment? What is the will of this committee?
Okay, move to approve the air quality conformity determination for the TIP amendment number 2.
A second.
Are there any objections to this motion? Okay, hearing none, motion is approved. Okay, moving right along to agenda item 5D, 2019 to 2022 TIP Amendment 2 approval.
So this is the amendment itself. The main reason for the amendment was the addition of the Academy Vanguard project. Anytime you add or delete a project, it requires an amendment. A lot of the other changes in here could have been done via administrative modification, but adding a project requires an amendment. And that's the timely process that we're going through here. So if you look at the memo itself, it talks about all the things that we've done. Theoretically, the red, which hopefully we didn't miss any of it, but the red in the actual tables are the changes, but the projects itself that we're changing are shown here. As I said, the main thing there is the addition of the Academy Vanguard Drive area traffic circulation improvements project. So, and then every time in the memo, we'll show the actual tables and the red shows the changes. So I can go through all of them, or we can just try to hit the highlights, however you want to do it. We've seen this for a while now, but any thoughts? Let's see here. I think the other change that where we're also adding a safety plan into the program. So that is something that we think is important that we'd like to do. Back in table 8, the HSIP program, this again is a program that the state of Alaska decides the program, but because it's using federal surface transportation dollars, it needs to be reflected in the TIP. So it's not a table that we decide the allocation of, but it is in here. So they have a significant amount of changes here showing their latest projects. In table 10, that's the transit program. So those are also dollars that are not decided, the allocation of which is not decided by AMATS, but again, surface transportation. So in this case, FTA dollars. So both the railroad and the transit department have a number of changes in here that need to be reflected. Those are shown. The only other thing is in table 11, which is the other federal state. It's on the back page here. This project was in the TIP already. It's project number 5 there, the bus and bus facilities infrastructure investment project. That's a project that, guess the way that program works is it needs to be reflected in the tip when they're applying for a grant. So it was in here in that manner. Now that they know that they got the grant, we have to reflect what actual category of money it came from, what type of money. So that's one small change in that. So happy to answer questions, but we are looking for you to recommend this to the policy committee for approval. It did go through the assembly process, and they recommended approval as well.
Do you have any other?
No changes from the assembly.
Any, thank you. Any questions or comments from committee members? Any questions or comments from policy committee members? Would anyone from the public like to ask a question or make a comment?
Ariel Gannon, AMATS. I did just want to point out something really quickly so everyone is aware, because it will come up here in the next couple of years. The beyond 2022 limit of funding went from about $105 million to $174 million. So it's a pretty significant increase with some of the project changes. So that beyond 2022 is what we look at as part of the next tip and beyond that. So the reason I mention it is because, you know, 100 million is pretty easy to spread amongst the 4 years of the tip, but 174 million is a lot harder when it's just roadway. So I just bring that up because there are a lot of expectations floating out there for members of the public of projects that are going to be moving forward in our tip. And so I just want everyone to be aware that there's a significant funding roadblock coming up.
Fun decisions in our future. So we're trying to figure out how to fit some of these projects. Basically what happened is we had a number of projects that were nominated for the tip, and this was the dollar figure that they said, this is how much we expect it to cost. And then as they got a little farther down the road and doing some design, they realized, oh, well, we need this or we need that, or maybe a little more right away or whatever. So a lot of those projects ballooned significantly. So those construction phases are larger and they're farther out. They're not in this 4-year life cycle, but that's something we're going to have to figure out how to do as we move further along. So.
I was going to ask a question about like, the likelihood of it. Could there be projects that come under and not that involved? I've never seen that really happen. So I'm just asking.
Well, yeah, there are projects that can come under, but I can't imagine they can fill a $75 million gap. But Jim will answer that question.
Through the chair, Jim Emmons in Alaska DOT. It is a concern, but it's less of a problem than Aaron is pointing out, for the simple fact that a number of the projects we're talking about aren't projects that are on a 4-year time cycle. It's going to take 6 to 8 maybe 10 years to get them through their full project development, because they're going to be very complex with a lot of challenges in terms of dealing with adjacent right-of-way, acquiring the necessary right-of-way, and working through that process is more time-consuming. So expecting them to be delivered within a 4-year timeline isn't realistic for several of the projects in question.
Can I ask this? So then does that mean that we would have the opportunity to put those additional funds into the next tip to offset that excess? If the project was going to take longer than 4 years, so we could just roll it into the next tip?
Exactly. Okay. Instead of all of that 175 million being in the 4-year window, a portion of it will be within it, probably within the roughly 100 million limit that we're typically trying to target, and the rest of the 75 million is probably in the 6 to 8 year window, which would be the next tip. So realistically, that's where this would spread out. But Aaron's right, we do need to keep an eye on that and make sure we don't overlook.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public? Okay. Okay, so what is the will of this committee?
I move that we, Technical Advisory Committee, approve, or recommend approval to the Policy Committee of the 1922 TIP Amendment 2.
Second. Thank you. Any objections to approval of this motion? Okay, hearing none, motion is approved. Mr. Lyon, are there any other action items?
I don't know then. I guess that's a no.
Okay. Moving on to item 6, project and plan updates. Craig, are there any updates?
I know we have an MLK, but I'm not sure who is that guy.
Yes. Noah with the DOT. Noah King.
There you go.
All right, my name is Noah King. I'm the project engineer for the MLK extension project for the DOT. I'm going to give a quick update of where we're at currently. As you can see, we've kind of rebranded the project for public use as the Tudor Elmore neighborhood connectivity. That was a softening idea for a consultant to not seem so intrusive into the neighborhood adjacent to Piper Street. So currently we have a contract with Arnhem Consultants to start the environmental work on this project. Going to go through the CSS process. We have a website currently with a little bit of information for the public. We've had 2 design shreds up to this point, and we're just getting ready to send out our agency scoping letter and recommend a preferred alternative to start working with. We have some public meetings and open houses scheduled for this fall, and then we'll continue to work through the NEPA process in the coming years. Currently, there's about $2 million in design funds and $14.5 million after 2022. We expect that to increase, but it's still very early stage at this point. The purpose need of the project has been distilled to the necessary accommodation of increased traffic demand resulting from the planned development in the southwest corner of Tudor and Elmore, right outside. We've run into a few issues at the south end, which was the original tip language set to connect to the south end of Piper Drive. There are many issues at the south end of Piper Drive. There's floodplain issues, 4F and 6F issues, wetlands, and right-of-way issues. So that's our main constraint in this project so far. We're using traffic analysis that Dowell did for the developer that used to be involved with the project. For TED, we determined that a collector is the appropriate road for this. And then we've done a analysis, our initial subjective analysis of the 5 alternative options that we selected and a no-build alternative. They've been ranked at the bottom. You can see a score from -1 to 12, I believe, is the highest. We'll go through those quickly. Take a look. Alternative number 1, I believe, is the closest to what was mentioned in the initial tip language. However, due to the 6F property and the wetlands and assisted living facility at the south end of Piper, this alternative is no longer being considered. Alternative 2 currently has a higher score of +12. However, there are a few right-of-way and utility conflicts on the Lark Street area that are more significant than we expected, and expect this to drop to number 2 or 3 as alternatives. This multi-unit housing and several other properties along Lark Street, which the right-of-way isn't very big. It doesn't even exist on this end. It would cause some significant issues. There's the multi-family housing, and then there's also a significant grade differential on the Piper Street tie-in for Lark Street, which requires more right-of-way acquisition and probably some design exceptions because it's so close to the intersection. This is our currently 2nd-rated alternative. It will likely become our 1st-rated as it doesn't deal with Lark Street and it avoids the south end of Piper. It still will have some right-of-way impacts on 46th. It's not expected to be a popular neighborhood, as that's our expected width of our typical section going through a cul-de-sac. This alternative, also rated as 0, is no longer being considered because of the South End of Piper issues and the assisted living facility being removed in this option. Option number 5 has a fairly low score due to a number of issues. It has more wetlands impacts and more mitigation would be required. And if we're using local roads as well as a collector, it doesn't seem to make sense that we would expect people to actually go to the south and use that road if they're accessing it. So that's probably going to be eliminated as well. And then that leaves as our second highest alternative, no-build alternative. And that would not fulfill our purpose and need as it is currently written. However, if there's no development plan for TED, then no-build will be our preferred alternative. Here's our typical sections again. Likely preferred alternative moving forward in the next couple weeks. Material. And that's about all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Todd, I have
Yeah.
a question. So maybe not necessarily a question for you, but more kind of different, broader question. This project scope, purpose, and need was basically based on the fact of the development of that other property. And has it been considered within the development of this project that that property is no longer being developed? And the purpose and need of this project, does it still exist?
We have considered that, but that is not necessarily our place.
And that's my,
Yes.
that's my question, probably not for you, more of a
Absolutely.
general question for the TAC and maybe even for the policy committee, but
That's a good question.
AMATS in general. I mean, what is the point of building this project? It's disrupting that entire neighborhood if the development over there is not moving forward.
Kim, you have a question?
Yeah, where the roundabout is, I'm assuming that that's what that yellow thing is, right?
Yes.
The roundabout. As you head, that would be west, and you see the 90. Why is there no roundabout there if there's one up there based on traffic flow? I just wonder how you determine that.
That'll still be considered. There's not enough right away there currently, so it would be a larger impact at Piper.
When you say right away, there's not enough space to put it.
Correct, yes.
Understand.
We'll look into that as we develop the design further though.
Oh, gotcha.
Correct.
Just for the record, can we get your name for the,
Oh, Adam Trombley.
thank you.
Okay, just to Todd's point, I mean, my understanding is that just because that development isn't going through with that, what the developer intended, the site has still been rezoned and replatted so that it can be redeveloped. So to me, that just because that development isn't going through, it doesn't mean that we don't get that development ready. I don't think, I guess, I don't think the purpose and need is totally out the window.
Thanks, Alatal. My question is, how many, so the original justification was to pull traffic off of Tudor. So do you have an estimate of how many cars are expected to be pulled away from Tudor Road with this redesign or any of the alternatives?
There is an estimate of the traffic that will be generated from the development and use this instead of Tudor, but I do not have that information.
Okay, and the reason I'm thinking that is that I know in our conversations, particularly with the community council, Campbell Park Community Council, there's a lot of conversation about what can be done to pull more traffic off of Tudor to relieve some of the congestion and the safety issues. So I'm wondering if it has, to use a phrase I hear a lot, independent utility regardless of the development, if it would still pull traffic off of Tudor Road or, especially that might be coming up Elmore. So,
We've not looked at that specifically.
okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Is there anyone online that has a question? Comments, et cetera?
Oh, just trying to say it's a bit difficult to hear, so please speak up.
Bit difficult to hear, please speak up. On stage, high school member.
Any other comments, questions?
So looking at this where you go through the old Tozier track, I mean, that seems like it chops up some really spectacularly valuable land. So is the actual position of that?
So I think that's based on the curve radius at the south end there. We're starting to head north. And so that's the tightest that we can fit in. And we're trying to stay furthest to the east and not be too near to the property on the west side. Yeah, but it's just a result of the design criteria. We have to have that radius.
To answer your question, John, yes, they could slide it east or west as they get into a final design. The radius of the curve stays the same, but where you start your radius and where you end it, you could shove that further west or east to minimize running it right up the middle of that whole property.
We're extremely early in the design of this space.
If we just paid $5 million for that, a lot more than your road on there.
Thank you. So if we're putting a collector road potentially, around, why would the local roads, particularly the one through Tozier Track and the other one to the east, be necessary?
I believe that's just to fulfill the purpose and need of your connecting and providing access to that area. They don't necessarily need to be in that configuration. We assume that there would be a developer to work with.
For purposes of accessing the
Accessing
development
that
lot?
Yes,
Okay,
that's right.
okay, got you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
So Tom's got a presentation as well, so this is the next item on the agenda.
Hi, Tom Davis, Planning Department, Long Range Planning Division, and I'm just returning to the Technical Advisory Committee with an update. And as we discussed when we visited in March for this project, we're getting closer to the point to where we would be determining whether the committee want to either weigh in on the project or assist us in making several policy decisions related to, or technical decisions, recommendations related to our parking requirements in town. This is a Title 21 zoning ordinance amendment. Typically, we don't come to the Technical Advisory Committee for Title 21 zoning amendments, landscaping or whatnot, but one part of our zoning ordinance really is at the intersection between what AMATS works on and its plans and our land use plans. So whether we care about housing or a transportation system, the parking requirements that end support facility at the end of your trip really affect a lot of what we do together. Just going back from March, just reminder, there are actions and policies in the 2040 plan that speak directly to amending our Title 21 parking requirements and looking also at our non-motorized, bike parking requirements, but looking at streamlining some of our parking requirements. Just really quickly, rundown, couple slides overview. This is a menu of ways people can request for their development, getting a lower parking requirement, which for a lot of reasons helps with development costs, adding housing, and other effects. This project would look at adding to that menu. It would look at providing more options for housing. But in the far right column there, what is proposing is streamlining the review and approval process for getting those reductions. If someone is providing affordable housing or providing any of these other features known to reduce parking demand, that this would essentially allow them to get non-discretionary approval, over-the-counter approval of their reduced parking requirement. There are about 4 of these menu items in the current Title 21 where they can ask for a reduction that have to do with where the project is in town. We would recommend in this project to yank those and replace them with a base lower area-specific parking requirement for those parts of town. Parts of town known to have, lower parking demand per unit of housing, per whatever square floor unit of commercial space, that rather than having to ask for the parking reduction, they would simply have a lower parking requirement to replace that. And it has to do with a lot of the characteristics of those areas. These areas are the areas nearest downtown, the alleys, sidewalk, street grade. Still also possibly looking at expanding the area outlined in dots there downtown where there is no parking requirement. We've had some challenges with doing that with this project, having to do with some challenges with our rights-of-way and on-street parking. But more broadly, this color map, very bright map, shows other parts of town where we are considering proposing to lower the parking requirement, basically replacing, an existing parking reduction option. Somebody can today ask for a lower parking requirement if they're on a public transit route or in certain parts of Midtown. This would, once again, replace that with a basic lower parking requirement. You don't have to ask, it's just a lower base parking requirement. And then lastly, some citywide changes to standards related to bike parking, encouraging alternative ways to get around. This is not the end-all be-all project at this point. We're not proposing to eliminate parking requirements citywide. As this chart suggests, we are looking at next steps once the census data and other parking utilization update data comes in, but we can look at achieving even lower parking requirements in the future to achieve our plans. Last couple months since we've talked, we've been looking more at parking utilization rates around town, particularly for these parts of town, to help calibrate a lower parking requirement. We are finding that multifamily parking utilization is about 10 to 35% lower, give or take, than the rest of the city. That means that most developments in that part of town are being required as a minimum to provide that much more parking than the average utilization. We're looking at what other cities do. Long story short, a lot of cities do have very specific parking requirements. Some of these towns have them burned as maps right into the pages of their code book. But Anchorage is unique. We're not monkey see, monkey do here. We are looking at issues we have with our rights of way and snow. And so I think several of you have been in several agency consultations in conversations with the agency's street maintenance, fire department, police department, and other agencies that are concerned if parking requirements get so low that we are, creating more on-street parking. Problems with the way a lot of our existing rights of way encourage you to park your car up in that sidewalk to get out of traffic. So since we met, we've had a lot of public meetings, a lot of feedback from different stakeholders, and have had an interactive questionnaire online just to get a sense of public support and concerns for lower parking requirements and these other changes. In general, we're getting a sense that those urban neighborhoods, Fairview, right near downtown, that there is support for lower area-specific parking requirements in general, and some stronger support generally with those that we've met with, having to do with lower parking requirements along our city's designated transit supportive development corridors that generally the ones where public transit is already invested in higher levels of bus service. We've also asked the policy question. Okay, generally support, but we've looked at a series of policy options in some polls, live polls at several events, and there's the no action type alternative, or alternative in which we continue with one size fits all parking requirements throughout town, an option having to do with providing an area with lower parking requirements, but keeping that somewhat close into downtown or older parts of town with the street grid and whatnot. An option to have more extensive lower parking requirements, a lower area-specific parking requirements to try and further encourage transit-supported development on our certain transit-supported development corridors. And then lastly, to avoid, complicating the code, what if we extended out that far but just had, more of a one generic lower parking requirement for all those neighborhoods? Generally, so far with the folks we talked to, we're getting support for the more tailored version in which it is extended, but a little more tailored by neighborhood situation with respect to how many people park. This is, the very first slide was about how parking requirements are a policy choice. They really are. They aren't really the property of a city planner or a traffic engineer. It's really a matter of how low you set your parking requirements really reflects what's important to your community. And these are four choices having to do with how high or how low we would set minimum parking requirements in these areas, these special neighborhoods. So if we're going to have a lower parking requirement, great, but how low do you set it? What do you calibrate it to? Currently, we're here with respect to, if you were to use an example of a multifamily development, say 10 two-bedroom units. Our current way of dealing with parking requirements in these urban areas is to really avoid parking spillover. Anchorage is all about avoiding parking spillover. Don't not house your cars. So our requirement is currently would be, in this case, 16, a minimum of 16 spaces for that 10-unit development, which is higher than a typical average parking demand in a multifamily development. So 4 spaces higher. But changing the code, we would have an option of perhaps lowering that requirement to match more of the average typical peak demand being at nighttime, or taking it even lower. We call this shift towards goals, because you're shifting towards that Anchorage 2040 ideal of a compact, efficient city, where your minimum parking requirement is actually, the base minimum requirement is actually less than the current average parking demand. And so it's really giving more flexibility to the development team to decide how much parking they want to require. What the research suggests is that when an area has that lower of a parking requirement, it actually can affect behavior over time, because we're no longer mandating that every development provide average parking demand amount of spaces. I'm not explaining that. But generally, feedback we got is generally either a B or a C. So there is that policy support out there generally among the stakeholders we've talked to. And those are the kinds of questions that are really a policy decision for the community, but they also relate to technical information. So we're receiving that feedback, and what we said we'd do in March is what we come back to the Technical Advisory Committee at a point where, we've kind of burned through the last couple months of public process and got this feedback, and now we're at a stage of taking that in and then working to develop a draft proposal, an initial community discussion draft, not a public hearing draft, but a draft we could put out to the public for review, as soon as everybody comes back from fishing in September. But basically, one possible option for the TAC that we discussed in March would be that the TAC or its members could weigh in on aspects of this project that are directly related to the 2040 and that affect street rights of way and affect some transportation goals. At the technical level, we're trying to be very transparent about how high we set these parking requirements, about what are the factors we use, and we're showing what is the real parking demand, what do we really need, but not only that, but what do we expect it to be a couple years down the road, and how far down the road do we want to calibrate our parking requirements to? Do we want to calibrate in 10 years down the road when everybody's going to be, served by their autonomous vehicle or whatever, or do we want to pull back, be a little more conservative? So that forecasting future utilization is very much a technical policy decision. And then there are several other options there if the Technical Advisory Committee or its members wanted to weigh in. Others are weighing in. These two policy questions are the live poll questions I just showed you. So at this point, we would be delighted if the TAC were to, at upcoming stage, provide feedback or expertise. It would certainly help us on the land use planning side, provide a sound basis for these very important decisions. Parking really is, in the zoning ordinance, the most land intensive requirement, but by far, on a typical development. So if any advice or sound moves in these choices really does have important effects, and we think it affects achieving some of the AMATS goals as well. So we may be back in a future month here as we either try to wrap up this community discussion draft and send it out, or a couple months down the road as we kind of collect comments from that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would any members of the committee like to make any comments or ask any questions? Would any members of the policy committee like to have any questions?
Sure, I'll go.
Well, there might be someone like, no. Yes, no.
That's it.
Any members of the public?
Sure. Brad, do you know if developers would be interested in providing parking minimum, or were most of them interested in just what was the developer perspective on it?
Yeah, it varies. Sometimes it varies by the type of use, and it also varies by site. Generally with residential, we see some folks asking for parking reductions. Generally, we see people just providing the amount of parking, minimum parking required, because it's kind of easy to pay. I don't know, I could be off on that. It just really varies.
If I can just add, and dealing with a lot of different residential projects that have come in, it's not so much that it's easier to not do the reduction. Oftentimes it would be easier if they did do the reduction because they're doing mental gymnastics of figuring out how to make their site work and provide the parking that they want to. But it's because they know their tenants. And so depending on where the residential is, they know that if they have a certain market that they're trying to rent to, that they know that that market will at least demand one parking space per unit and sometimes two. So to kind of to Tom's point, it does depend on the type of development, but oftentimes we are seeing developers will not take the parking reduction. But to the point about if we make these changes and we start to see effective behavior and that people start to live closer to transit lines and we start to put more money towards the maintenance of clearing and transit lines and on pedestrian routes, then people maybe start to shed that extra car, ideally, and then we'll hopefully start to see the market respond and wanting that lower parking. But like for instance, downtown already does not have a parking requirement. I don't know of any residential development downtown that does not have parking because they just know the market and they know how Alaskans are. We love to have our kayaks and whatnot that we're shipping off to weekend getaways. So, but anyway, we think this is still a step in the right direction. I think the other thing to note is that there's a lot of concern we've heard from the public and then some of the other departments that would be on the hook for maintaining snow and stuff is it's probably important to remember that there's already a lot of development in this town. So it's not like it's gonna shift to where people all of a sudden there's no parking. This is really gonna affect in the immediate, probably more infill development. So you're not gonna see huge impacts across the city. It's gonna be kind of spotted. But what that does do is it frees up where we have a lot of surface parking and maybe too much surface parking for people to do more infill vertical development. So just a much more efficient use of the land.
We have one comment online from Barbara Carlson. She said she's glad to see consideration for more bike parking to encourage non-motorized travel.
Anything else? Mr. Juan, are there any other updates?
Just the one that we added that Renee Whitesell is on.
We have, Shayna has her hand raised.
Oh, Shayna.
Shayna, go ahead.
Hi. Got some feedback. I just wanted to say thanks for all of your work to do the research and present that to us. I do like to see that this has alignment with some of our plans, including the climate action plan to encourage alternative modes of transportation. So I think we're on a good path here and kind of moving forward and trying to figure out what does make sense for Anchorage and what goals we do want to work towards. So just wanted to say thanks for your work on this.
So I'm not sure if Renee is online still and they were going to present, so.
Yes, I am online.
Oh.
All right, I have a presentation that I would like to share. Should I just use that through the standard way on Teams?
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so thanks very much to all of you for having us present today. My name is Renee Whitesell and I am part of the project team working on the Chugach Transportation Elements Study. And just a reminder to everybody, our vision for this study is to identify roadway improvements to support opportunities for redevelopment, with an emphasis on safety, access, and multimodal facilities in the area. And the Chugach Transportation Element Study was identified as part of the Spinard Corridor Plan to undertake a specific focus on the Chugach area to identify transportation improvements that could catalyze development. So this next slide just shows an overview of the study area that we are currently considering. So as you can see, running through the middle of the study area is Chugach itself, and the study area is bordered to the north by 36th Avenue, east by Arctic Boulevard, west by Minnesota Drive, and northwest by Spinard Road. And we also have a study boundary to the south of 40th Avenue. But very early on in the study, when we were undertaking some site reconnaissance, we appreciated that there was a lot of traffic coming to Chugach Way and exiting from Chugach Way via Wilson Street and Indiana Street, which are two connecting streets along Chugach Way. So for the purpose of our traffic analysis, we actually extended the southern boundary of our study area all the way through to Tudor Road, to enable us to take a really good closer look at the superblock area that was feeding into Chugach Way, and also to try and affirm some of the early community feedback that had been received that Chugach Way was being used as a cut-through for traffic, and that a lot of the traffic that was present on Chugach Way is not actually local traffic. So the first activity that we've recently completed is a review of existing conditions on Chugach Way. And that review of existing conditions has looked at built features such as right-of-way, roadway layout, non-motorized facilities, utilities, and existing land uses. Social, economic, and community characteristics. And in this area, we've undertaken a review of land use plans and policies, transportation plans and policies, the demographic context that informs that neighbourhood, who lives there, whether they are renting, income status, etc. And also the land use context, so taking a look at how land use is currently distributed and also future land use plans and developments that are currently underway. We also undertook a review of traffic conditions, looking at motorised traffic and also multimodal traffic, and the natural environment and physical context, in particular looking at groundwater, waterways, and contaminated sites. So just as a very quick fly through Chugach Way, this is the neighbourhood that we are looking at. As you can see from the photograph I've got on screen, it's a very narrow roadway along Chugach Way. So we're talking about approximately a 30-foot right-of-way along that corridor. There are no informal non-motorised facilities present in the corridor, which during the summer means that people share the roadway with traffic, and that's the same in the winter, but just imagine that roadway is a lot narrower because of the snow storage along the sides of the road. We also observed that there are some elevated right turn movements to Chugach Way from Spinard Road, and shown on the screen right now is that intersection. And what that is some of the cut-through traffic that's being observed with traffic going from Spinard Road through to Arctic Boulevard using Chugach Way. And we also observe that there is a very narrow intersection with Arctic Boulevard. And I think this photo captures quite well that there is quite a lot of traffic at this intersection. This photo was taken on a Thursday at about lunchtime, and there was a considerable volume of traffic using Chugach Way even at that time of the day. So I'm just going to run through very quickly now our observations that we've seen thus far, and that's informing the recommendations that we will be making on improvements to the roadway. As I mentioned, it's a very narrow 30-foot wide right-of-way. There are no formal non-motorised facilities. We're also aware that water, sewer and storm drain infrastructure may be insufficient to support denser housing development provided for by current zoning, and that's something that we want to talk further with land developer stakeholders in the area about. And one of the big benefits of Chugach Way is there is a relatively limited number of property owners. So what that means is that there is a greater opportunity for coordinated redevelopment on the Chugach Way corridor and surrounding area. With regard to social, economic and community characteristics, all of the MOA planning documents support a reinvestment focus area surrounding Chugach Way, which is one of the reasons why we're undertaking this study. There is a future primary active transportation network identified between Minnesota Drive and 36th Avenue, and that is shown as following the Fish Creek historic corridor. We're also aware that the Spenard Road Rehabilitation Project, which is in its early stages of design currently, has a goal of enhancing facilities for walking and bicycling. So that will support future walking and biking activities along Chugach Way and ensure that there are better facilities available for a range of users. And more generally, there's approximately 850 residents in the study area right now. It does have a fairly high density of development, and it's a high proportion of renter-occupied, lower income and minority residents. Traffic was a particularly interesting set of observations, and we actually undertook some traffic counts on the corridor in March of 2021. And what those traffic counts confirm to us is there is indeed a significant proportion of cut-through traffic occurring on the Chugach Way corridor, and approximately 25% of all the traffic that we observed was actually cut-through traffic going from Spenard Road to Arctic Boulevard primarily. And approximately 33% of the traffic that was present on Chugach Way was actually traffic originating to the south of Chugach Way. So that was traffic joining Chugach Way from Wilson Street and Indiana Street. So only about 30% of the traffic that is actually present on Chugach Way on a daily basis is truly what we would call local traffic. As I mentioned, traffic from neighbourhoods surrounding Chugach Way, so that would be Wilson Street in particular, which forms the spine between Minnesota Drive and Arctic Boulevard. They have controlled access to the south, which is Tudor Road, and west, which is Minnesota Drive. And what that does is that channels the traffic north towards Chugach Way. And the only access to the east, which is Arctic Boulevard, is actually via Chugach Way. So it's not surprising that we're observing that about 33% of the traffic on Chugach Way is actually originating from that neighbourhood to the south. What that is resulting in, however, is an elevated crash rate along Chugach Way because it's a local street that is functioning with traffic that's not necessarily local traffic, so that traffic drives in a slightly different way along that corridor. There are also some features of the roadway, such as trees that are blocking views and viewing triangles that are less than optimal, so those are conditions that we will be looking to improve through our recommendations. And I've mentioned a couple of times now, there's no dedicated non-motorised facilities to support the primary active transportation network, which is one of the key focuses of Chugach Way in a number of the planning documents. And then just in closing and observations, the historic channel of Fish Creek is present through the area, which can provide an opportunity for redevelopment. And we are also aware that there are 6 contaminated sites within the study area. So moving now to opportunities, there are several opportunities that support redevelopment in Chugach Way. We've already been in early conversation with both JJ Brooks and Cook Inlet Housing. JJ Brooks recently had a rezone approved of their land, and we'll be talking further about what the redevelopment plans will look like. But early indications are that they are very excited about opportunities to improve the transportation network through the Chugach Way area. And the Seahard development, they've already had one development moving forward, and land was recently broken near the corner of 36th Avenue and Spenard Road to support redevelopment. There are also future redevelopment plans of the Kathy O estates that we're aware of that we'll be understanding further through our discussions with developers. So once we pulled these existing conditions together as a project team, and just as a reminder of who is in the project team, it is Dow, and we're working land use planning, transportation planning, traffic, and also CRW supporting us with traffic and public involvement. We held a workshop, considered the existing conditions, and then started to draw up some early ideas for roadway improvements along Chugach Way. And ideas that were talked about were opportunities such as widening the right-of-way, installing some form of gateway feature to integrate with future land uses in the corridor, and also to provide some traffic calming features, recognizing that the corridor right now is being used for a cut-through, an elevated level of cut-through traffic, and also collecting traffic from the neighborhood to the south. There was strong desire to incorporate a sidewalk facility, to improve lighting, to improve facilities for snow storage, to address sight distance issues that were being observed at intersections, to improve connections to the surrounding street network, both for motorized and also non-motorized. Opportunities were discussed to potentially accommodate on-street parking, also potentially to accommodate a parallel bicycle trail facility at 40th Avenue. One of the opportunities we are investigating is potentially a collector roadway classification, but we're also wanting to look at ensuring that any recommendations that move forward ensure emergency access to future land uses in the area. So one of the things that I'd like to gather once I've finished my presentation is your feedback and further ideas to contribute to our early ideas as well. And I thought I would show to you just some illustrations of the images that we drew up as part of our workshop. And the other element that we explored during our workshop was evaluation criteria to really critically look at different alternatives for roadway improvements and transportation improvements in this area. And we tried to categorize this criteria around public and users, traffic, the built environment and built environment characteristics, and also the natural environment. And our early criteria that emerged as having the strongest interest was we wanted to ensure that criteria reflected the ability to implement the Municipality of Anchorage and other plans, ensuring that there was the provision of facilities for non-motorized transportation, ensuring that recommendations did accommodate traffic calming and really trying to give this local roadway back to the local community that it's serving, ensuring that we're very clear on what right-of-way needs there are and that recommendations do not require excessive right-of-way, ensuring that any recommendations that we're mindful of the cost to build and implement the recommendations. We also want to ensure that we are taking account of and supporting developers' plans as much as possible. And we want to ensure that any roadway improvements are mindful of funding availability. So our next steps on this project over the summer, we'll be conducting stakeholder meetings, we'll be refining alternatives, we'll be evaluating alternatives and seeking feedback. In the fall of 2021, we'd like to come back and talk to you again and also seek your feedback again. And then from there, we'll be confirming our concept recommendations. And then moving towards winter of 2021, we'll be finalizing the transportation elements report. So thank you very much, and we would appreciate your feedback.
Okay, thank you. Are there any policy committee members listening who ask any questions or make comments? Would the public like to ask any questions? Oh, okay.
Bart with Transit, and it sounds like Renee, you've heard it pretty loud and clear, but we have transit routes on Arctic and Spinard, and we're adding one on 36, and a lot of the population to the south of Chugach Way accesses those lines via Chugach Way. So pedestrian facilities are pretty important for our ridership. It's pretty decent ridership in that area. So we just echo those comments that you probably already heard.
That's great. Thank you very much for that feedback.
Any other comments or questions? Please.
James Starzik, DOT. Renee, I'm just curious, you know, a lot of these recommendations seem to require additional right-of-way. And, you know, there's a lot of properties in there that you would, if you were to expand the width of this right-of-way, the roadway, it would be impacting. And have you considered what positive outcomes might be available, alternatives be available, if expansion of the right-of-way was not an option?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and that's one of the reasons why we're wanting to get out over the next month or two and start to really talk to land developers in the area. Early feedback that we've had is that they are receptive to widening right-of-way as part of implementing their development. But we are aware that we're dealing with a very narrow and very constrained right-of-way in this location. And I appreciate the reminder that that is really key to supporting several of the alternatives we're considering right now. So we will ensure that that's front of mind in our conversations.
Renee, this is Joni. Thanks for that presentation. I just also wanted to back off Jamie's comment. We do have some example street sectionals in the Skylar corridor plan that already that we had put in there specifically to address roads like Way with that limited 30 right of way. So there are a few examples in there already of how of ways we can improve the street for bicyclists and pedestrians specifically in that 30-foot right of way. And I'm sure you've already looked at it, but just to remind everyone that that was part of the plan and it should be in there already. So it's an element that's been approved and adopted. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I guess I do. I guess, Renee, this is Michelle McNulty. I'm just wondering if maybe you've considered the runoff street option, which allows you a little more flexibility in how you do pedestrian rights of way, and it also can be used as traffic calming.
No, and I'd like to connect with you further to have a chat about that, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Moving on to item 8, committee comments. Floor is not open now for any comments by anyone. None? Okay. Thank you all for your participation. Meeting is adjourned and it's 3:58 p.m.